Hi, writers and readers. How you guys doing? I hope that you guys can hear me okay. I'm using a different microphone, and I'm hoping that it sounds pretty good. This is the new microphone I got with my new camera, so it should be nice. I have all the Christmas decorations going on behind me. Happy holidays to you guys. And what I wanted to do is I read this article, and the title of the article is the title of this video. So it was an article about the writing advice from iconic authors, and there's just like, I don't know, about 5 per author, maybe 5 authors, maybe fewer. So I wanted to just sort of run through them and read them to you and see, like, what do you think? The link for the article is down below so that you could also do a video like this or do a blog post like this or whatever you feel like doing. So I'm just going to read these and I'm going to tell you what I think, basically. Okay. The first group is from Hemingway. So the first quote is, "To get started, write one true sentence." I know a lot of people agree with that, and it makes sense. Of course, it makes sense because it's supposed to be easier to do. Of course, it starts you out with something you're familiar with. It's a little bit less pressure. So, Merry Christmas! Hi, Z. Thank you guys for coming. So it's supposed to be easier, but to be honest with you, I would have, this is kind of silly, but I would have a hard time thinking of what I should be writing. I would be like, what true sentence should I say? Is this like 100% true? How does that make me feel? Like, I get really too much into that kind of stuff and I start like debating about it. So for me, I actually wouldn't even do that. But as I said, I know a lot of people think that that is really good advice. So if you do that, really cool. For me, I would probably get really distracted by it. So the next one is still Hemingway. "The best way is always to stop when you are going good and when you know what will happen next." I totally agree with that. I've done that before. There have been times where I write past what I know is going to happen. I write what I know is going to happen and then I stop. And I don't know where it's going next. And it's like hard to resist not doing that, you know, because you're excited to get to that part that you know is coming. So, you know, I tend to do that, but it is better if I control myself and I just wait and I stop at a point where I know what is coming next. And then when I pick up, you do have that flow going. You do already know like what, at least what you want to say, if not the way you want to say it. And so it can like lead you into the next unknown area a lot better. And it starts you out with your writing session in a more confident place. So I definitely agree with that advice. I think that's great advice. Next one is, "Never think about your writing when you're not writing." I always do. I don't know about you guys, but for me, sometimes that can help get me through the day if I'm feeling kind of restless, like doing stuff that is necessary but isn't writing, isn't creative necessarily, thinking about what I might write, thinking about even other pieces that I haven't started yet. It gets me excited. And maybe what they mean here is like, or maybe what he means here is, you know, it's distracting. And I guess it could be frustrating sometimes if you think of a lot of stuff and you can't actually do anything about it. So from that perspective, I understand in a way, but I think it depends probably. I think that is definitely a per person thing. "Don't describe an emotion, make it." Yes, definitely. That is going along the lines of show, don't tell, which can be hard for some people to understand quite what that means. Some people tend to think it means more description, but it's actually a lot more than that. And I do have a video that I had recorded and just need to edit all about that and what it really means and how to go about it. So I definitely want to do that. But don't describe an emotion, make it. Yeah, definitely make it happen. Let's see the buildup. Let's see how we get to that point. And then, you know, you don't have to do all this like describing like this person was angry. Feel it, you know, and describe that feeling. And sometimes it comes out like in your first draft a little bit like strange or awkward or whatever, but that's okay because that's just the beginning of the creative process there. I do that all the time where I write stuff that's sort of like, oh dear, you know, not very good. But then when you come back to it, you have an idea of what you're trying to express and you can edit it into shape. And then the final piece of advice from Hemingway is be brief. And I am definitely someone who believes in that. I am one of those people who I can't cut out parts of for the most part, I can't do like what do they say, cut 10% or 20% of your book. And that's supposed to eliminate a lot of stuff that you don't need. Like I underwrite a ton. So being brief is not a problem for me at all, which is probably good. I have to expand a lot. And one thing that matters a lot to me is that I really only say what's interesting, what needs to be said, and every word counts. So I definitely agree with being brief. I would love to hear from like fantasy authors and maybe sci-fi, because those are two genres that tend to have way bigger books. And that I'm sure is much harder to be brief in because there's a lot of details that have to be talked about and you can't help it always. Okay, we're into Mark Twain now, so we have a few points of advice from him. The first one is the difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. 'Tis the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. I think most of us have already heard this, and I think it's a brilliant way to express that. Yeah, the right word. A lot of times when I'm writing a draft, I'm really concerned that I will forget the exact idea I was trying to achieve and that I won't be able to pick the right word because I'll like sort of lose the emotion I was feeling or what I was exactly trying to get across later when I'm editing. So what I tend to do, I know I've said this in other videos too, what I tend to do is like if I'm doing my first draft, I will put all the things that I think are close or along the same lines in parentheses right within that sentence. And that way I have like all of my ideas just laid out and I can remember what I was trying to achieve, where I was trying to go with it. And then I come back and I can figure it out later. So I don't stop my writing. And also I have the time to like really figure out what is the best way, what is the best word, what is the best phrasing, whatever it is. Definitely agree with that. And I really love the way he phrased that. Okay, the next one is when you catch an adjective, kill it, kill most of them, then the rest will be valuable. Yeah, I'm definitely not somebody who's all about like no adverbs, no adjectives, no this, no that. You know, I always think that balance is important. And I also think it depends on your style. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I think that is definitely something that's also different for everyone. So, but the point of you know, kill most of them, then the rest will be valuable is really, really good. That's a totally valid one. Whenever you don't overdo something, it means a lot more. And that includes things like ambiance. You know, I've mentioned before, there's a book out there called The Fall, and it is based on an Edgar Allan Poe, what was it? Fall of the House of Usher. And that author spent so much time in this ambiance that was a really good ambiance that I got used to it, and it was really no longer valid. It didn't achieve anything. It was kind of boring. I was done with it. So I think that part of it is probably my favorite part of that advice, no matter how it applies. The next one is don't say the old lady screamed, bring her on and let her scream. Of course, it's the same kind of thing. So he has the same advice as Hemingway, show, don't tell. And it is really important to make a reader feel like they are actually in the scene and watching it. Like I always think that cinematic writing is really important. I want to be able to visualize, even if I don't have tons of description, you can still make that work. So I 100% agree with that. And I really try hard to achieve that in my books. I'm not going to say it's easy. I definitely edit and re-edit sections many times to make sure that I'm getting that right. So, but I think it's absolutely worth the time. His next one is the more you explain it, the more I don't understand it. And I think this is an interesting one because I have definitely read scenes where somebody really wants you, like the author wants you to understand how a room looked, for example. And so they might go through a lot of trouble to explain where exactly this fireplace was, what exact color it was, where exactly that window is in comparison to the fireplace, and stuff like that, where they take so much time to describe a room. I've seen it mostly with rooms, which is why I'm saying room, that it really, first of all, it takes away because you're taking the reader out of the whole experience. You're just describing something that's relatively irrelevant. The only time you really need to do that is if the ambiance is actually symbolic or has something major to do with the book, with the scene, something like that. If you need to say that a chair is located in a certain place because, I don't know, a character is going to fall over and onto it and die or something, then just think about whether you can wait and actually show where it is during that scene or at a pivotal point where people get why you're explaining it. If they don't, they might just forget because they don't think it's relevant. So I've also seen the kind of over-explaining where it's, like I said, it's not achieving anything and it gets confusing. It gets like, okay, I understand where the desks are, but why do we have to hear where the chairs are and exactly how they're positioned and exactly where the window is? Like, it can definitely get confusing, and I definitely tend to skip over that stuff when I read it in a book. And as an editor, I always try to eliminate as much of that as possible, or put only what's relevant in the place where it's relevant. So I also think that's another thing that's worth taking the time to do right. Let's see, Mark Twain's last piece of advice in here is, the time to begin writing an article is when you have finished it to your satisfaction. I guess what he means is like you write your first draft and it's like garbage. And then I guess the time to begin writing an article is when you have finished it to your satisfaction. So you finish it, it's good. And then you probably have a lot of, you feel very critical of it. And maybe you want to rewrite it or write it better from that point, something like that. That's an interesting one. I would love to hear your opinion on that. Like, am I getting right what that means? Or what is your opinion of it? I'll read it just one more time. The time to begin writing an article is when you have finished it to your satisfaction. Let me know what you guys think about that and what you think he means by that down below. Or if you're here, if you're watching it afterwards, down below, if you're here in the chat. Elmore Leonard, let's see. Oh, almost 50 novels throughout his career. Pretty cool. Let's see. He says, avoid prologues. Well, that's pretty specific. I don't necessarily agree. Well, I don't agree with that. I think that there are definitely books where prologues are really necessary and they achieve something amazing, where you can see a little bit of background in a way that sort of separates it and says, hey, this is important. When I was really young, when I was maybe in middle school, I would just skip all prologues and introductions. I just didn't think that they would have anything useful because I had read so many books where the prologue didn't seem connected to the rest of it. So as long as you're connecting them and they make sense, the prologue going into the main event, then I think it's okay as long as it's serving a purpose. Why is it a prologue? If you can answer that question, then maybe it's a good idea to do it. But where I agree with him is when you have books, and this mostly happens in fantasy, where you have 2 or more prologues. I kid you not, I have seen up to 4. I want to say 4 prologues. It would be, or something similar, would be like introduction, prologue, another word for it, and another word for it. Sometimes a cast of characters in the beginning as well. So you've got like this much book before you get to the book. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit frustrating. Let's see. Z is saying, I hope I'm saying your name right. Z is saying, my problem, I start and then stop after a moment. I never finish what I want to write, even if I know what I want to write. Why is that happening? I would be interested to know, like, is it sort of you feel stressed about it, or you're not sure about your ideas, you feel like you need to get more organized? There's a lot of times if you think about it, you can sort of figure out what exactly is stopping you. And at that point, maybe I could help you, because I've had those kinds of experiences where I start and I write like 2 sentences and then I'm like, Facebook or something, Let me know if you get the chance, Z. I would love to try to help you with that, if I could have a little bit more detail. Okay, so we're done with avoid prologues. On to the next. Don't go into great detail describing places and things. All right. Again, this is a preference thing, but for me, I am always sort of tell me only what I need to know type of person. And there are people who are the exact opposite. And they're like, no, describe someone all the way down to like their toes. You know what I mean? Like, I want to know everything. And they want to know the color hair, the color eyes. They want to know how full the lips are, what kind of body, what kind of clothes, stuff like that. To me, I don't think it's relevant unless there's something relevant about it. Like, for example, in Anatomy of a Darkened Heart, here's an example. I took the trouble to describe one character probably more than most of them. If you've read it, you know that I don't spend a lot of time describing characters. I definitely don't spend a lot of time describing settings unless it has to do with the ambiance or where someone is sitting, if that has any relevance. It really depends on the relevance, though. So there's one, Conrad Scott. That character, I describe his face in a very specific way. I describe it in a little bit more detail because the point is Abigail finds him very attractive, very attractive. And she's sort of like, I'm not sure if he's actually attractive or if I just think he is because he has an enormous smile, and she's in very dark, gloomy circumstances all the time. Her life is very difficult, is very dark. And so when she meets this man who has a smile that is really, really big, you know, there are some people who have really big smiles. And I'm thinking of, oh, I always forget his name, Eddie Redmayne. That's the guy I'm thinking of. And he has a beautiful smile. It takes up a lot of his face. And that was the whole thing. I wanted him to have a really big smile, but bigger than his, even just like where it could be a little bit like some people might not find that attractive and some might. But her thing is, even though I'm seeing like these, you know, he has some very extreme facial features, and there's a point to that. Like, you know, who knows if he's actually attractive to everyone else. She's just so attracted to him because of the smile that is so big and that she never experiences at home. And so because of like his demeanor and that, regardless of whether you read that description and think, ew, I don't really like his looks, she's like, wow, this guy is gorgeous, you know? So sometimes those things can be really relevant and important. And sometimes like when someone is just described like a lot of books from the 1940s and 50s go into like straight description. You're introduced to a character and it's just, you're hit with description and it's like a paragraph of what they look like. And, you know, to me, that's kind of boring and I don't care about a lot of it, you know? So that I would say is really up to your writing style, what you think that your readers might want. But definitely don't waste time on like a setting that doesn't have much to do with anything. That's my advice anyway. Okay, Z has come back. She says, problem with motivation, I think. I can't keep motivated. Oh, don't worry about your English. Your English is great. I understand you completely. Okay, problem with motivation. You know, one of the things that I do for that is if I sit down and I'm sort of like stuck in my day job, for example, and I can't like get out of it and I'm feeling like, oh my God, I just worked so much and I'm so tired and I don't feel like in it, I will go to a lot of measures to put myself in it. So Z, I'm going to give you an example. There's a specific work that has taken me more to get into than any other, and that's Greed, my novella. Now, it's not difficult to write. I've actually, that book, I wrote the most in a short amount of time that I've ever written. So I can go on it very smoothly, but I noticed at some point, I was like, man, you know, I'm really having trouble getting inspired. I'm coming home from work, I'm tired, I'm not into it. So I like sort of thought about like, what am I picturing when I picture writing this? And one of the things I saw in my head for some reason was I used Scrivener and I was picturing this document, the Scrivener document, with a black background and with colored text. I don't know why. So I made it full screen. I did the black in the background. I did the colored text, and lo and behold, it helped me write. I can't explain it. It's just what my brain needed. It needed to be in that like sort of, even the words are in a dark place or something like that. Then I realized I really felt like I needed to hear some ambiance there. Like everything was too quiet. No music was really fitting. So I went on YouTube and I found some ambiance, and it can be like, sometimes it might be like a fireplace. There's virtual fireplace on YouTube. There are some places that have wind sounds, thunderstorm sounds, all kinds of stuff. And I really needed that to build in my head to like be in the setting. So that really helped me write. It helped me get going. And then every night I was so looking forward to going back to that special place that only applies to that work. And that sent my motivation skyrocketing. So like maybe try something like that. If there's something you think would help along those lines, those are all doable from home too. You don't even need to go anywhere or buy anything. So like, you know, maybe that could help. I hope it does. And if not, I have lots of other advice to give you. I'm loaded with advice. I've tried so many things, you know, I've been writing since I was a little kid. So I have lots of things to share with you guys. Okay, so let's go into the next one. This is still Elmore Leonard. try to leave out the part that readers tend to skip. And you know what? This is such an excellent piece of advice. And a lot of writers will say, but how do you know what they're going to skip? What do you skip when you read? I mean, that's one thing. Another thing is when you're reading and you are very critical, be critical of yourself, not in a mean, self-hating way, but just in a, let's pretend this isn't my work, what would I say about it kind of way. That's all. So I do that. I take heavy hits to my work because of me, you know, but it's extremely useful. And I have been able to, for example, in Anatomy of a Darkened Heart, I really wanted to write a Christmas scene and a birthday scene. And I was so excited about it. I was pumped. And there was another scene that I was dying to write. Once I got to those scenes, like I found that they were no longer, they were kind of repetitive. I had already dealt with all the issues I was going to deal with that were going to be represented in that scene. And so I thought, if I put this in, it's going to be repetition. I hate writing repetition. And to me, I'm sort of insulted when an author repeats themselves too much. I'm sort of like, look, I'm paying attention. I'm into your book. I'm excited. You don't have to repeat yourself, you know? Of course, there are some details. There's always exceptions. But anyway, so for me, I said, you know what? I would skip that. I would think, why did this person rewrite this? It's practically a rewrite of what I've already read. I would not care. So I eliminated those scenes. I decided either not to write them or to cut them out, even if I had written them. And then, you know, there are those areas where I go over the top describing, like, for example, I put a lot of time in Lock and Key into lock research and key research, finding out how do you make these things? What equipment does it take? And that was like in the 1850s. So I put a lot of time and effort into that, and I wanted to use it. And I would like write something that had too much of that, and it was completely irrelevant to the work. It had nothing to do with anything, but I had done the research and I didn't want to waste it. And so when I read back over it when I was editing, I thought, you know, this is no good. Nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to want to read it. And by the time they read through it, they might be bored. They might put the book down. They might skip it. Delete. That's it. And by the way, when I say delete, what I mean is cut it out and paste it elsewhere, because like into a separate document or something, because you never know when you're going to use that in the future. It can be a deleted scene. It could be something special that's locked just for newsletter subscribers or something. You know, here's what I cut out. But anyway, don't like literally delete it, because that's like the worst thing you could ever do. Nemo, yes, this will be going up in a video. This will be on YouTube permanently after I'm done. When I stop recording, it's going to be up permanently. So thanks for asking. Okay, the next one is keep your exclamation points under control. I think that's really funny. I've noticed that sometimes when I edit a book, if it's someone who is not a native English speaker, sometimes there are extra exclamation points. And I think it has to do with just being a non-native speaker and not being sure for English, should there be like an exclamation point here? I want to make sure that this comes across right, something like that. And so there will be extra exclamation points. This happens with English speakers too. There are some people who put in a lot of exclamation points, but they lose their power if there's too many in there. So I definitely recommend only putting it in places that it is really necessary, you know, to exclaim, to say, you know, this is important, or this was a big deal, or this was shouted, you know. And there are some people who don't believe in exclamation points at all, and they never put an exclamation point, even if the thing is like somebody shouting, somebody yelling, you know, somebody saying something, I don't know, something happening that needs it, you know. And that can be definitely, I keep saying definitely. Anyway, if I was editing this, if I was editing myself as a writer, I would be deleting all the definitelys. There are preferences per writer, and it's something that's subjective in some cases, but there are general standards for that kind of a thing. So I agree with that. If it sounds like writing, rewrite it. Yeah, I think we've all heard that advice, and I 100% agree. I do that with my work all the time. I go through and I edit and I see, does this, like, that is especially a problem with dialogue, I would say, for me, to make it sound like a realistic dialogue, especially when you're trying to get somewhere. You're at point A, you're trying to get to point B. Characters have to say this, that, and the other to get here. And we tend to, or, you know, you can tend to go into writing unrealistic dialogue to get them from point A to point B. But What I tend to do is in the first draft, I just write whatever. I get them from point A to point B in not an elegant fashion. And then when I edit, I go back and I say, well, what would this person really say though? And I write that. And sometimes that makes it hard. Sometimes it's not easy. So I'm definitely challenging myself there, but it ends up really good because it'll be a more natural conversation. It'll be a more flowing conversation. And sometimes I find that I have to move point B. I have to move that event elsewhere because it's simply not natural and wouldn't happen. And the last thing I want is for readers to read it and say, this is ridiculous, So be critical of that kind of thing. And you can end up with a work that is so much more believable, that people get really sucked into and they're like, oh man, and that, you didn't take the easy way out. And readers get that, they really get it. At least I've noticed that when I hear from a reader or I read a review, they seem to really get that. So I'd say it's really important. And now we're on to our final author advice. This is F. Scott Fitzgerald. And we have a few here. Cut out all these exclamation points. What were we just talking about? Some of these guys, they relate to each other. Cut out all these exclamation points. An exclamation point is like laughing at your own joke. That's interesting. So I guess if I read all of his works, I would find no exclamation points. That's interesting. I don't particularly agree with it. I understand what he's saying, but there are points where I think that they really suit. I think that they suit when someone is shouting. I think that they suit when somebody is angry sometimes, when somebody is excited. That can work. And you know what? There are rules that are sometimes broken. Like, for example, I believe one rule is like never put all caps in your book. Like for somebody speaking, like when they're maybe, yelling or something like that. And I believe Harry Potter books have that. And you know what? It works. It's great. It really, really works. So I don't agree with the exclamation point thing, but I do know of authors who do agree. I guess it's stylistic. But like I said, there are usually things to guide you with that. All good writing is swimming underwater and holding your breath. Okay. It's like a torturous type of thing, right? I kind of get that. Merry Christmas, Jason. Thank you so much for coming. Great to see you here. I'm going to message you. I miss you. Okay. All good writing is swimming underwater and holding your breath. So I guess it's just a matter of like hoping that it's going to come out right. I don't know. That's another one where I feel like it can be interpreted a bunch of different ways. What do you guys think? Leave me, if you're here, put it in the chat, and if you're watching this afterwards, then definitely put it down below. I'd love to hear what you think of that. It is, I guess you could say, it just sounds like it's a struggle, like it's a struggle, like it's difficult, like it's torturous or something like that. At times it certainly can be, especially if you're writing a difficult scene, a scene that is either difficult for you emotionally, personally, or because you're like sad your character has to go through whatever it is that they're going to go through. I've definitely had that happen to me before, where I've taken a break from writing because I'm really upset about where it's going. So I'm not sure if that's exactly what he means, but I don't know. It's not really advice either. It's just his feeling. You can stroke people with words. Yeah, you can definitely impact people, and the impact you have is something that you may want to think about. Not everyone is interested in the impact that they have when they write, but for me, part of the reason I really like writing about gray areas and stuff like that is because I think a lot of people don't understand the impact they have on other people, and I think that it's kind of important. A lot of times I explore dark psychological issues and gray areas and stuff like that. Hey, Joe, so glad you got to make it. Oh, we had a Go Indie Now stream last night. I was on the panel. Go check it out. It was really good. It was planning for next year. So yeah, I definitely like thinking about how that's going to impact people, but also dealing with the whole, when there's any kind of abuse in a book, for example, I always think it's really important, like in my book, Anatomy of a Darkened Heart, there's a lot of consequences to that abuse. And it kind of shows how this is a domino effect, and when I say what the bad parts of it are, of course it's 100% bad, but the abusers sometimes, they feel some kind of relief or something like that when they're doing it because they've been hurt. This is just going lightly on the surface. And so my whole thing in anatomy is to show that like this is a domino effect and everyone suffers from when you abuse somebody, you're going to suffer too. That person's going to suffer. They're going to make someone else suffer, So I do think about the impact that my writing could have and what it could show people. But it can, it can impact people in a really positive way. You write something that has a lot of hope in it and that somebody could relate to it and really like their spirits could be lifted, or they could begin believing in themselves if they didn't. So definitely I agree with that. It's, I turned it into advice there. I don't think it was, but I turned it into it anyway. The second to last one is what people are ashamed of usually makes a good story. Yeah, definitely. What people are ashamed of, what people are afraid of, what people find disturbing, things like that absolutely make a good story. Anything with extreme emotion involved, extreme circumstances, those are all excellent story lines. They are good for character development. They're good for plots. And they're even good for settings. Like you don't have to write horror to be able to include your setting in a way that really impacts the characters and impacts even the reader. I use the wallpapers in Anatomy of a Darkened Heart to create a sort of, they're practically a character. A lot of reviewers have said that, and I'm glad that came across. And it's meant, that and other things in it is meant to make it feel claustrophobic, and overwhelming. So I don't remember why I said that. It has nothing to do with this advice, but anyway, I'm sure there was a reason. So yeah, definitely anything extreme is something that makes a good story. And the last one we have here today is find the key emotion. This may be all you need to know to find your short story. Okay, it could be story in general. It could be anything. Find the key emotion. This may be all you need to know to find your story. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My books are all character based. And so emotions are a heavy, heavy, heavy part of it. And a lot of times I'm trying to achieve certain emotions in the characters, a lot of anxiety and where it comes from, a lot of fear and where it comes from, things that people deal with on an everyday basis that they might not really get where it's coming from. And so I find it interesting to sort of write into that so that there's some background to like, why does this person feel that way? And, not everybody's going to read it for that. And not everybody's going to quite see it that way, but it is in there. If you go back and you want to analyze it, you're going to find out like, okay, well, where did this feeling come from and why? Which to me is really important. I love analyzing stuff like that. A lot of my research comes from reading biographies, and autobiographies. These are real people who have felt real things caused by real events, so I can sort of get a very well-rounded idea of how these emotions came about, why somebody has specific fears later in their life, why people carry stigmas or anything like that, why they're afraid of something, whatever. You can pick that up when you read about real people. I think movies also work that way, but those are creative things. And so if you're trying to get like a psychological approach, watch a movie, love the character, love how they were and why they were, and then make sure you do your research to make sure that's actually realistic. Because I have definitely found in some movies, even really, really good ones, that things don't always quite add up and there are missing details or an explanation of like, why would this person do that is missing. So in a book, you have more opportunity to do that. Joe, you can't see me, but I just keep nodding. Totally agree. I can see you nodding in my mind, Joe. That's what Amber says. It's so funny. Yeah, so you can definitely centralize. You can create a central theme and an entire novel based on emotions, based on psychology. I do that with all of my writing. So you can certainly do that, and you don't have to have a plot. One piece of advice that is not in here, we're actually done with the advice from the article, but one piece of advice that kind of drives me, it doesn't drive me nuts, is when people try to, even professionals, try to put it has to be this way, like tell you it has to be this way. And there's always advice that says there has to be a protagonist and antagonist of this or that. that's not the case. Write your story the way you want it, you know, and then edit it so that it makes sense and it works and it's powerful. A story has to have a beginning, middle, and an end, very clear. I would argue that mine don't, you know, so it's really a life. You're peeking into a life or lives. And, you know, there aren't necessarily beginning, middle, end. You know, there aren't necessarily protagonists and antagonists. And that's what makes works unique. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a bunch of very interesting writing advice to me. Some of it was just opinion, but some of it was advice from these famous authors. And I did agree with most of it, but some of it I did not quite agree with. So there were those two vague ones that were in there. I would love to hear your opinion on what you thought they meant. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, I will certainly do that. I love discussing articles. I love discussing indie news. I love discussing writing advice, writing approaches, anything having to do with writing, really. And I'll probably be doing more live streams next year than pre-recorded videos because this is much easier for me, and I really enjoy it. I enjoy being able to just talk to you, and I enjoy being able to see you guys in the chat. And I think that like just sort of talking is much better to me than the editing, at least right now. Who knows, maybe I'll change my mind in a year. But anyway, thank you guys for coming. I have loved seeing you guys here. And I'm just going to read up one more thing. Joe says you just have to be careful not to be too expository and stick with showing, not telling. Exactly. Showing. I completely agree with that. So thank you guys so much for coming. This will probably be the last time I see you before the holidays. So have a wonderful holiday season, and I will see you in the new year. Bye.